Now on Indianapolis This Week.
We became a national laughingstock during the RFRA debate.
Is he the person who will challenge John Gregg for the Democratic nomination for governor? Our Sunday morning exclusive with potential candidate Tom Sugar. Plus, is Mike Doubt ready to make a run for Washington, D.C.? The conservative state senator goes one-on-one about his future. And saying yes to a deal with Iran. Senator Joe Donnelly explains his vote in favor of the plan.
RTV6, the Indy Channel. This is Indianapolis This Week with Rafael Sanchez.
Thank you for joining us for Indianapolis This Week. Join us on Twitter right now and be part of our program. Just go to our account, our handle at Indy This Week. We start with the race for governor. Two Democrats now out of the race, Glenda Ritz and Karen Tallien, who entered her campaign Monday after the AFL-CIO endorsed John Gregg. The focus now turns to potential candidate Tom Sugar, the former chief of staff for Evan Bayh, who is seriously considering a campaign. He's now with our State House reporter, Katie Hines.
Let's talk, Tom, about why you're considering a run for governor and getting back into politics.
You know, it's a great question, Katie, because I really didn't see this coming. Some people, I suppose, run for office, but I feel like this office has sort of run toward me. A year ago, I established a new not-for-profit called Lead or Leave. I encourage your viewers to go to leadorleave.org, O-R-G. I started that with the interest in trying to solve our broken politics. Our government is not structured now to resolve the big, difficult challenges facing us. Nancy and I have two boys, 19 and 12, and I feel like we're leaving an awful lot of problems for them. We've kicked so many cans down the road, and that's bad enough. But what's worse is just the very structure of our government does not allow or reward thoughtful debate. And so I created an organization to show Indiana there's a better way. We can redraw these maps, make sure that people's voices are heard, and give them a government as good as they are. And in the process of making that point, making those presentations around the state, people have been asking me to consider to run for governor. They feel it's a compelling choice and a compelling message. And so here I am in an unexpected place, quite frankly. I had given up on politics when I left it as Evan Bayh's chief of staff in 2009. I was fed up with just all the politics being played all the time in Washington. If you ask Evan, he'd say much the same. And so I went out and created a new not-for-profit to work on college completion issues and help more kids graduate from college. And so I thought I was done with it. You know, it did not work. I wanted to find a new way forward. But then this sort of lingering feeling that we're leaving too many problems left unsolved brought me back in.
How do you think the current system of redistricting affects the functions of the State House? What gets done, what doesn't?
The RFRA debate was a perfect example of that. And we're all embarrassed about how all that unfolded. We became a national laughingstock during the RFRA debate. And regardless of how you feel about the issue, the thing that should make Hoosiers most upset is that our government does not function. In the case of RFRA, the Chamber of Commerce, our leading corporations, our leading job creators warned the legislature, don't go down this path. It's unnecessary. The protections already exist. It will do damage to our economy. And what did they do? They tuned them all out. Tuned them all out. Katie, because they were worried about one thing, and one thing only. When you come from a very, very gerrymandered district, when the system is rigged to ensure your re-election, the only thing you're thinking about are who votes in your primary election. And sadly, most Hoosiers have completely checked out of primaries. That means that people from the most ideological extremes of both parties participate. And so the ideological extremes of the Republican Party in this case were saying, this is what we're going to do to you in your primary, and you know we can beat you, so you better listen to us. And so they did. Thankfully, our corporate leaders stood up and said, time out. This is a bad idea, and we got things back on track and got a fix in place. That's what I'm talking about. When our elected officials just worry about a small number of people who vote in the primary elections, we get bizarre, out of balance, out of touch kinds of legislation. And we can fix that, though. I have a plan that will fix it, and we've got to fight for it.
Talk to us. If you get into the race right now, you'll face, if you were to do it today, Democrat John Gregg, who has close to $2 million in contributions in the bank and also has received support from some big labor unions here in the last few days. Do you have the support? Do you have the resources to get in and to run this race?
I will say this, that my first and foremost concern, because before I'm anything else, Katie, I'm a husband and father. And so because I helped create this not-for-profit where I work now, it's a nonpartisan institution. I cannot run for governor and continue to work where I am. So I have to find a new job that will allow me that flexibility. And I'm making good progress on that. When it comes to whether I have the resources to be heard, I'm confident that I will. I'm sort of a build it and they will come kind of guy. And I think if we give people a compelling reason to be involved, they'll get involved. So I'm sort of unusual as politicians go, although I hate to call myself a politician. But for the purpose of this argument, let's say that I am. I'm not one of those guys who thinks that if you lose an election, your life ends. You know, I lost an election in 1992, and you know what happened the next day? The sun came up, and new opportunities presented themselves. I'm not concerned about any of that. I don't care who's up, who's down, who's in, who's out. I don't care. I know what we have to be talking about. I know the reform that is essential to make our government work, and I will use everything in my power to make sure people can hear it. If I can figure out a way to take care of my family, I'm in.
You talked to your longtime boss, Evan Bayh, about this.
This is a very sensitive time for Evan, and I know all Hoosiers join me in saying prayers for Susan's rapid recovery from her surgery. It's a slow process. He and I talked about it briefly, but not in detail, because when we last spoke, it was actually a couple days before Susan was going to have surgery. But you know, I haven't worked for Evan for 7 years, you know, and my service to him and my service to the state is something I'm very, very proud of. I think my service with Evan in the governor's office and in the Senate qualifies me to be your governor, no question. But I'm also my own man. I'm my own man. And I'm coming back into politics, possibly, because I have my own vision for the future of Indiana. And that's what Hoosiers deserve. They need campaigns about our future. Who are we? As we're about to celebrate our 200th anniversary, our bicentennial. If there was ever a moment for reflection on who we are and where we're going, and whether we have a government that works for us to give us the future we want, it's right now. I don't see that choice being presented. It needs to be presented. People deserve elections as good as that, and gubernatorial elections should be about big, transformative ideas, not small politics. I have no intention of running a campaign if I get in that's poll-driven. You know, essentially how it works, Katie, is you hire a pollster, you say, okay, what do they want to hear? And the pollster says, well, this is what they want to hear. And they say, okay, well, how do they want to hear it? And the pollster says, well, this is how you need to repeat it back to them. Rinse, repeat, etc., right? I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. If I get in this thing, I will not hire a pollster. I know how this all works, okay? I've been there for 24 years. I served in public office in very, very high positions. I'm not coming back to nibble at the edges. I'm not coming back to sound like the other guy or just run a campaign because I'm not the other guy. I would come back with a very, very precise idea in mind.
When do you plan to make a decision?
I think that time is not my friend in this case. I do think it's important to get in sooner than later. I would hope that around Labor Day or no later than that, I'd be able to make a final decision. You know, it's interesting. People, because I'm gaining some notoriety, and thank you for having me on the program, people are stopping me on the street now. And they're grabbing me by the arms. They're saying, oh, I hope you go. I hope you go. Because we need a fresh face. We need new ideas. We need someone to talk about the future, not the past. They're ready for a fresh start. And so I think we all need to think long and hard about the best way to present that fresh start to people. And I do think that means fresh ideas.
Tom, we appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks, Katie. Enjoyed it. Thank you.
Katie, thank you so much. You heard Tom Sugar talk about the group Lead or Leave. You can find more about that organization and their work to change the way that redistricting is done in Indiana by going to our website, theindychannel.com. You'll find a link in the Hot Button section. Coming up next, is Mike Delph ready to join the race for U.S. Senate? And what's he saying about Donald Trump's plan to build a wall to stop illegal immigration? He joins us next on Indianapolis This Week. Welcome back to Indianapolis This Week. We bring in now, of course, State Senator Mike Delph. Senator, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
There is talk that you may be considering trading your position as a state senator for possibly a run for U.S. Senate.
We've been asked by some of our supporters to consider that. we have a timetable between now and the end of September to make a final decision. But obviously, as a father of 5 daughters, that is a very involved decision that's not mine alone to make, and so we're trying to be very deliberate with our thought process on that.
Why trade in what you know to be at least the State House of in Indianapolis for the dysfunction of Capitol Hill?
You know, that's an excellent question, and that's a question that my wife asks me just about every time we talk about this. You know, the country's at a moment in time where it's either going to rise or fall. We have problems with international security. We have a problem with this Iran deal that the president's pushing. We obviously have a problem with the national debt, with almost a $19 trillion burden on our posterity. I think we're ripping off the next generation. And so there's a sense of duty that calls, I think, in this. But there may be other folks out there that are better suited to carry that message than Mike Delph. We'll make a decision before the end of September.
Was Senator Joe Donnelly wrong to support the president on this Iran deal?
Absolutely. I think anything that allows Iran to possess a nuclear bomb will destabilize the Middle East and put Israel, our #1 ally in the region, put Israel's livelihood at stake. And so I think it's a grave error to provide cash or comfort to Iran in the acquiring of a nuclear bomb. I just think it's terribly dangerous.
Donald Trump talking about possibly building a fence along the border. Is that a good idea? Is that even possible?
Well, nation states have to have borders by definition, and nation states have to have laws, and nation states should have the ability to enforce the rule of law. And so I think, you know, any border, whether it's north or south, we should have the ability to protect our borders, to secure our borders. We know that we have folks that are not just from Mexico and Central America or South America crossing our Mexican border, and not everybody that crosses our southern border means us well. And so I think that's a #1 national security issue in America.
But is a fence or a wall realistic? Are we East Germany? I mean, is that really America to have a wall per se?
Well, there's all kinds of things you can do with technology as well, with drones and whatnot. I mean, they just had a big escape from a prison of a leader of a drug cartel where he tunneled under the earth. And so I think you have to look at technology and see what we can do with technology. But I think a wall needs to be on the table.
Back here at home, infrastructure, a major issue, especially after the situation in Tippecanoe County with the Lafayette Bridge. The governor is talking about possibly dipping into the rainy day fund to focus on infrastructure. Is that the only option on the table?
Well, you know, when Governor Daniels was in office, we carried through a program called Major Moves, and you see highway construction and road construction going on throughout the state of Indiana. Now, whether or not that has stressed INDOT to the point where we're not able to maintain existing roads and bridges, I don't know. But I've heard this issue enough that I would anticipate the legislature and the governor to address something when we go back in session in January.
I just left Chicago, where every turn I made, I paid a toll. Is it time for Indiana to have tolls everywhere?
You know, I'm not a big fan of tolls or tax increases, but I think when we go back into session in January, we'll talk about what we need to do as a state to make sure that we have the best roads and the best infrastructure for our citizens.
So yes to tolls or no to tolls?
I'm not a fan of tax increases or tolls.
I'm not a fan of tolls either, so I'm glad to hear that from you. When you do return in January, there will be a very serious discussion on the extension of civil rights to the LGBTQ community. Are we ready to have that discussion in a civil way?
Well, I think the legislature needs to have any discussion on public policy done in a civil way. You know, out at the U.S. Supreme Court building, there's a quote above it that says equal justice under law. And anytime you're talking about protecting any special class to the detriment of other classes of individuals, I think you get away from that equal justice under law concept. And so I would have some reservations. You know, when I talked on the Senate floor about the RFRA fix, I suggested that we go back in time and repeal RFRA, repeal the RFRA fix, and then rely upon Article 1, Section 3, and that would be my position going forward in January as well. But I'm sure we'll have that discussion and many other discussions when we go back in session.
Will you file a bill to repeal RFRA?
Well, you know, that's going to be a discussion for our caucus to make. I don't want to put the caucus in more of a difficult position that we're in right now. Passions are very high on this issue, but that would be where I think we need to go as a state and a party, to go back in time time before RFRA, before the RFRA fix, repeal all of that and fall back on Article 1, Section 3. When you read our Indiana State Constitution, one of the central fundamental themes is this idea of the conscience not being able to be coerced by government, the idea that someone's religious faith not be able to be coerced by government, and that's a fundamental value of the state of Indiana, and we need to remind our citizens of that.
Senator Mike Dahl, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Anytime. We look forward to speaking to you later in the year.
Thank you very much for having me.
Appreciate it. Coming up, Joe Donnelly's decision to vote in favor of the deal with Iran, one of the key swing votes on the president's plan. Our Jason Fechner is with our insiders to talk about the impact of that decision. Next on Indianapolis This Week.
Welcome back to Indianapolis This Week. We're joined on this beautiful Sunday morning with our political insiders, Abdul and Laura. Good morning. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Yeah. Let's start with the governor's race. We just spoke with Tom Sugar earlier today. Ritz is out, Tallien's out, so you'd figure Pence versus Gregg, but possibly not. Does he get into the race, and could he win?
Possibly. What Tom Sugar shows me is that Democrats are, although they like John Gregg still sort of has the stigma of losing the last election, and so they're hoping for somebody, anybody, as a possible alternative. I saw an internet meme by some progressives, saying John Gregg for governor, he's not as mean as Mike Pence. So the progressive wing of Laura's party is looking for somebody other than John Gregg. I think John Gregg is going to be it because John just got so much money and so much infrastructure and organization that he's going to be their nominee.
Well, I think Tom has put out a really credible plan called Leader Leave for legislative redistricting, and he is elevating the conversation about legislative redistricting and the need for it in a very positive and bipartisan way, which I think is an important contribution he's making. But one of the challenges is because we are at the point where we are, and John Gregg has the money he has, Tom really would have to hit the ground running. I have no doubt that he could, but at the same time, it's also tough for somebody like him because he has been a former staff person for so many years, and I think for those of us who've worked on the staff side, it can be a challenging transition to make. I don't think he couldn't do it. I definitely think he could because he certainly is a force of personality, but it can be sometimes a challenge to make that, especially to get your name out there in a primary.
Let's move out to Washington now. Senator Joe Donnelly this week coming out in favor of the deal with Iran. Are you surprised?
I'm not surprised. I really am not. I'd be interested in your take on this, since you're kind of a Capitol watcher.
From a perspective of knowing Joe, it doesn't surprise me at all, because if you look at his explanation, he said, hey, let's give it a chance to work first, and if it doesn't work, we can always go back and make some changes. I think some of my Republican, more conservative friends sort of jumped the gun a little bit. The fact that it is the president, that it is Iran, they sort of automatically said no, whereas with Joe, and Joe's always been a more thoughtful Democrat, saying, "Hey, let's give it a chance to see if it works." That doesn't surprise me at all.
Well, I think it's. I'm sorry. I feel like I'm interviewing you this morning. Sorry, Jason. But I think with somebody like Joe Donnelly, he really does vote his conscience. He does the research. He does spend the time on it. And what I thought was so interesting about what he said is he and Senator Lugar, whose actually seat he took, and who he replaced, is they're both on the same page with it. So he tends to have a very thoughtful, reasonable approach and a very bipartisan approach to what he does, so I guess I wasn't as surprised.
Yeah, and again, today it's funny because Democrats love him on his vote on the Iran deal, but they can't stand him on his vote for Planned Parenthood, which means Joe is doing what, being very thoughtful and following his conscience.
Well, Joe is always. I mean, I think we know that with him, and whether you like it or not, he's going to do what he thinks is the right thing to do.
All right, now let's talk about Mayor Greg Ballard's budget. $1.1 billion, essentially status quo across the board, though some minor tweaks and changes here and there. Abdul, your thoughts on the budget?
The mayor is doing the next mayor of Indianapolis a favor by leaving them with a budget that is balanced, that leaves them some reserves to play with, gives us more police officers, addresses, at least starts to address the body cam issue, some of the infrastructure, and with the economy, probably the city expected to pick up some of the good economy revenues a year and a half, 2 years down the road. Whoever's mayor of Indianapolis, they'll have to thank Greg Ballard. They should keep his picture on the wall for leaving a city in such good shape.
I just sometimes laugh.
I thought you were getting a headache.
I am, but it's all right. It's okay. This was for a budget like this really is a caretaker role, essentially. You're setting it out for the next person. I think that he is probably doing what he is known to do, and that is to leave things in good financial order. And I think that this is something, a responsibility that I think for someone like Mayor Ballard, he takes very seriously. And regardless of who follows him, he wants to leave it in good shape. And so I think there will be a lot of cooperation, especially with his.
And the other thing too to keep in mind is you don't want to. What the mayor said is they don't want to do anything, too drastic, make too many changes that the next council and the next mayor are going to have to deal with. Like, no, let's just leave them a budget in place so they know what the books look like when they come in, and then they can kind of take it from there and make whatever tough decisions they want to make.
So no big fights in the chambers ahead over the next couple months.
Oh, I didn't say that.
Well, I was going to say, you never
there's
know.
already some things over Vision Fleet, Blue Indy, the homestead tax credit. There are going to be some rumblings, but we'll see if everybody can behave and get along.
We have a Blue Indy stop in my neighborhood, and every time we walk by it, my 7-year-old says, "I just don't think this is a good idea."
As Abdul just said, though.
There you go. That's what you have.
Behave and get along. Which
Behave
you guys
and get
did
along.
This
well, we try.
we try
very hard.
Thanks to our political insiders for being here. You can follow them and us on Twitter right now at Indy This Week. We'll be right back.
Hope you're having a great day. Storm Team 6 meteorologist Kyle Mounts here with a check of your Sunday forecast, and we are going to be tracking some thunderstorms for you as we head through the afternoon and into the evening. There's a marginal risk some of those storms could be on the strong side, mainly some gusty winds, some small hail that we'll be watching for, but not everyone's going to see the rain. We time it out for you with TrueCast 3 o'clock. You notice that rain moving in around the Lafayette area. Indianapolis, a broken line of showers and some thunderstorms around 5, 6 o'clock in the evening, extending around Anderson, back through the Spencer area, and then by the time we reach around 8:30 or so, Rushville, Richmond dealing with some of those thunderstorms, and then we start to actually clear out our skies a little bit tonight. High temperatures today, upper 70s northwest where that rain moves in a little earlier, a little warmer for you in Columbus at 86, 82 in the city. We turn much cooler for next week, highs only in the mid to upper 70s with lots of sunshine.
A new school year, a vision for its success. Next week on Indianapolis This Week, we sit down with IPS Superintendent Louis Farabee. We'll discuss the direction of the state's largest school district, the constant calls for reforms, and the district's relationship with state regulators after getting back Arlington High School from a takeover operator. Thank you for joining us for Indianapolis This Week. For Jason, Katie, and all of us here at RTV6, have a great Sunday.